Amen. You guys be turning with me to Exodus chapter 9, verse 8 this morning. Exodus chapter 9, verse 8. And we'll be looking at the plague of boils today. Exodus 9, verse 8. The past 4 months we have covered together Exodus chapters 1 all the way through Exodus chapter 8. And we've seen this young prince of Egypt be called out of a life of comfortability behind the palace walls and serving as someone in a very powerful position and nation who had everything at his disposal. Everything was at his fingertips. And we've seen God, these past 4 months, draw him out and turn him into an ambassador for his people and for his purposes, and also turn him into a messenger for his people through a series of plagues as God begins to attack the alleged Egyptian sources of life of the day. But he also serves as a messenger. He also serves as an ambassador through this effort to make himself known and set his people free through those attacks on the gods of Egypt. And so we've been looking at the life of Moses, and it's led us to this study on the plagues. And today's passage reveals very simply that God can take the very things that torment and tempt us and weave them into a fabric of His glory, a tapestry of His glory. He takes everything that tries us. He takes everything that gets under our skin. He takes our mistakes. He takes the lessons that we learn through either His power, through His providence, or through our mistakes, and He weaves them into a purpose for His glory. And what we're going to see this morning is how God takes the leftovers of something that was very painful for the Hebrew people. He takes something that was a reminder for them of the suffering that they were in, serving as slave labor in this very powerful and mighty nation. And He takes these leftovers and He inflicts pain upon the Egyptian people from that remnant of their suffering. And He's doing all of this, and through all of this, He's able to accomplish His purposes, because as we've been talking through these sequences of plagues, we know that the first sequence that God wanted to make Himself known. And He says that very plainly in the early chapters of Exodus. So He's doing all this so that Pharaoh will know, that he will know that He is the Lord. And so He's making Himself known. He's accomplishing that purpose. He's proving that He's in the land, which is the main point of this second sequence of plagues, plagues 4 through 6 in Exodus chapter 8, 9, and 10. And then He's also inching closer to setting His children free, setting His people free, which was another thing that He was going to do through these plagues. And so I want you guys to pick up with me in Exodus chapter 9, and we'll read verses 8 through 12 this morning. The plague of boils. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on the people and animals throughout the land." So they took soot from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. This passage, this scene reminds me a lot of the story Holes. If you guys have ever seen the movie Holes or read the book, where Shia LaBeouf stars in the movie at several years old, and he's wrongly accused of something, and he gets sent to a juvenile detention camp. And it's kind of played off like this is going to be a place of growth and mentorship where he can kind of learn how to relive and right his wrongs and things like that. And when he gets there, remember, he's innocent. He actually didn't do the crime that he was accused of. And he gets there, he realizes that this is a desert. An old lake had dried up. And the leadership of this camp sent the boys out from this detention center out into this dried up lake bed every day, and they had to dig holes. And they had a 5-foot shovel, and every single day they had to go out in the sun in this desert place, and they had to dig a hole that the circumference was 5 feet. It had to be the length of the shovel, and the depth of the hole also had to be the length of the shovel. So it was 5 foot by 5 foot. Every single day they had to go out and to dig these holes. Now at the end of the movie, he's set free. He's vindicated. He's digging a hole one day, and he and his buddy discover something that was down in this hole, and I won't ruin the whole movie for you. The whole movie, wow. No. That was free. I didn't know that was coming today. That was good. That was good. Anyway, and so I won't spoil the movie for you guys, but at the end of the movie, he's actually set free by something that they dig up in one of the holes, and it actually lets him live this lavish lifestyle, and it sets him free, it rights the wrong, and we see the very thing that he suffered from, the very thing that he was sentenced to do daily that caused him so much pain. I mean, you guys ever dug a big hole before? You get blisters after a few minutes on your hands. Your feet get sore from kicking the shovel down the ground. You got to throw the further you dig down, the further you've got to throw the dirt out. So that's what he was doing every single day, and he's set free of that by the power of his name. And the Israelites find themselves in a very similar position at this point. They're suffering by no fault of their own. The Egyptian people had forgotten that it was because of the Hebrew people to begin with that they were spared from a famine centuries ago. And now they're going to be set free. They're going to be redeemed in riches for the rest of their life. They're going to be ushered into the promised land by the power of God's name and by his grace and through his grace alone. And so it would be very easy for us to go into a lot of details this morning that were kind of gory, but I'm going to spare you of that, because if you're anything like me, when we start to talk about blood and bodily fluids and things like that, some of us get a little bit queasy, and I know you're probably going to tune me out if we get into too much depth about these boils that we're going to read about at a little bit greater depth in just a few minutes. So instead, I'm going to apply a little bit of humor that's not original to me, in saying that the plague of boils is the scene where we really see Pharaoh start to get squeezed. It's where we see him get pressed from all sides. And it's where we see things come to a head for him, okay? And so this is the plague of boils, and all things aside, all puns aside this morning, this is a really important thing. And what I want to do first is talk about the plague of boils itself, because God is really starting to inflict some serious pain on the Egyptians. They're hurting. He's got their attention. So it's important to know that up until this point, if you're just joining us today, if you missed the beginning of this series, we've been going for 5 or 6 weeks now, there's been disruption in the Egyptian way of life. There's been discomfort. There's been some odors. There's been some itching. There's been some smells. And they've had their way of life altered by these plagues so far, but they really haven't been in pain. They've had some discomfort, but they haven't been in pain. This is the very first time in this study that we realize that the Egyptians are probably having this moment where their lives might be in danger. Their lives might actually be in danger by what God is starting to inflict upon them. So you guys read with me again in verses 9 and verse 10. It says, "It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land. So they took soot from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals." So verses 9 and 10 tell us that this plague contains boils bursting out into sores. Now the first word there for boil is probably better translated to say inflamed area. The closest thing that I could compare this to in our day and age in America with our modern medicine would be MRSA, where you have staph infections that break out and they get swollen and they start to swell underneath the skin. And maybe it's actually hot to the touch, where you can physically feel the heat from the infection under the skin. And if you let that infection go, it's going to finally rupture, and it's going to cause a sore, and that MRSA can spread to other parts and cause other infections. That's the closest thing that I can compare it to. But this isn't an exact reference, but we know from Deuteronomy 28:35 that these kind of boils were commonplace in this day and age. It says, "The Lord will strike you on the knees with grievous boils, of which you cannot be healed, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head." And so we know this is something that the people commonly dealt with in that day and age. And so these are inflamed, festering boils, and they're probably very similar to what Job experienced later when we look in Job chapter 2 and we see him physically scraping his skin there in Job 2 verses 7 and 8, where he's actually trying to give himself some comfort from the boils that Satan has inflicted upon him there in Job chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. That's how desperate Job was to find any relief. That's how desperate he was to get just a moment's relief from the boils that he had covering his body. Some of you have heard this story before, and I won't go into all the details. When I was serving at Sandy Creek Baptist, a senior pastor, I guess about 10 or 11 years ago, I picked up some sort of skin issue from a nursing home visit, and it was horrible. I had a horrible experience with this, and it was to the point it would start every night around 10 o'clock. And I never had an official diagnosis. I have some ideas of what it was. Around 10 o'clock every night, my body would start to get hot. My skin would start to get hot, and then I would itch uncontrollably from 10 o'clock. I could set my clock by when this would start, from 10 o'clock p.m. to about 7 or 8 in the morning, every single night. I itched, I was hot, my skin was burning. There was no relief for it. There was some cream that eventually I got that helped it go away and be resolved, but I lived in my grandparents' old house at the time, and for those of you who ever went to their house down in Comer, Papa had built a very huge stone hearth around his fireplace in his living room, and it was probably 6, 7, 8 square feet total. And so it was stone. It was very rigid. He was the insurance man. It seemed like a huge liability to me to have all this jagged rock. Some of you students who have been there to hang out probably remember that. You had to be careful because if you walked past, one rock would just slice your calf muscle right there. I mean, it was sharp. It was terrible with kids learning to walk and crawl in that house later on. But that stone was cold. And every night when I started to itch, I would go and I would lay on that hearth because it would cool my body, and I could move my back around. It's kind of like Baloo on the Jungle Book, where he starts to rub his back on the tree. You know, I would actually lay there, and the coolness of the stone would cool my body and give me relief, but then the stone itself would scratch my skin, and it would give me relief. This is what they're inflicted with. This is what they're dealing with. They are being physically touched by this issue. They are being physically touched. They're everywhere. It's hot. It's painful to the touch. They're covering them from head to toe, and there was no relief. And what we're going to see in a few minutes is that there was no one coming to help. And so, secondly, what's important for us to notice is where the plague of boils comes from. Because there again, verse 8, take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. So all of these plagues have come from God. We know that God is the initiator of all of these plagues, and he's used water, he's used dust, he's used air, he's used different things as vehicles to inflict his purpose and this pain upon the Egyptian way of life. And this time he commands Moses to take soot. He sends him to a kiln, and he instructs him to take fine dust, this fine powder that's left over from all of this burning, this brick making in this kiln. He tells him to pick it up and to throw it in the air. Now, if any of you have gone through an art class, you probably know what a kiln is. Maybe some of you do this for fun, but a kiln is an insulated chamber. It's a type of oven. It produces temperatures that are high enough to actually change the chemicals within certain things, certain objects, to make something that has been loose or wet and turn it into a brick or stone. We see those used for pottery and things like that. They've been used for millennia as a way to make pottery and ways to make bricks, and that's what the Egyptians were using. And so he instructs Moses to go to this place. He instructs Moses to go to the place where his people have been suffering at the hands of this furnace. Who used the kilns in Egypt? It was the Hebrew people. Who was making the bricks? It was the Hebrew people. And so what we see in this moment with the origins of this plague is we see God taking something it was a result of Hebrew torment and suffering, and he uses it for their good and for their glory. And that is why we can sing songs like It Is Well. That is why we can stand and sing and raise our hands together and raise our voices and say, It is well, because we have a God who is able to take the very thing that causes this pain and causes us agony. He's able to take the very mistakes that we make as fallen creatures. He's able to weave those things for our good. He's able to weave those things for our glory. And that's what we see God doing here. This is poetic justice. I mean, we live in a society that wants justice all the time. This is the scenario that we dream of, where somebody actually gets in return what they've given to someone else. It's a very beautiful picture of God taking the Egyptians and reminding them, you've inflicted all this pain on my people, and now it's your turn. And when we read stories like this in the news, and we're like, yeah, vengeance has been served. Justice has been served. Somebody got their vengeance. Somebody got what they deserved. And so we see, again, this eye for an eye theme that we've talked about, God communicating to Pharaoh that he has seen everything that he's done. He knows everything that he's done against his people. We think about Pharaoh throwing the Hebrew babies into the water, and he turned the Nile into chaos. It got completely out of control. He reversed the Nile on them. Pharaoh tried to slow the growth of the Hebrew children, and he takes the sign of their fertility and their rebirth, and he turns it against them and turns it into chaos. He tries to prevent them from going out into the wilderness and making sacrifices and worshiping their God, and their priests are defiled by lice or gnats or flies or whatever it is that infected their skin. And so God remembers. And in this plague, God is saying, I know what you've done to my people, and now it's your turn. This is what we long for. But then also I want us to notice what the plague of boils did. What the plague of boils did. And very simply, if you're taking notes, it got their attention. It knocked them off their high horse. It knocked them off their pedestal. However you want to phrase that to carry with you throughout this week and throughout the rest of your life, this plague has their attention. I want you to look in verses 10 and 11 with me. It says, so they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on the people and animals. Now, this is very important. Catch this. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. There is some irony here that I think is very intentional. Because you've got Moses and Aaron. They're going before this mighty powerhouse. They're confronting Pharaoh, who's probably the most powerful person in the known world of the time. They're going face to face with him, and they're able to stand. They're not inflicted. They're able to approach this position with confidence because of their God, and it's the Egyptian magicians who could not stand. So Moses and Aaron are fine. They're standing, they're obedient, they're participating in God's plan for this plague. In verse 11, and the magicians could not stand before Moses. They're humbled. They are humbled. They are knocked off their feet, literally, and all of a sudden, this mighty nation is at the mercy of this Hebrew God. So God's got them exactly where he wants them. And the boils show the impotence of the Egyptian gods. And there's a couple that we could talk about. There was a goddess, Sekhmet, who had power over disease and controlled diseases and their severity and their extent and how wide they were able to spread. The Egyptians actually wore an amulet to keep the evil spirits believing that she would protect them from disease and from infliction. She was depicted with the head of a lion, so you could almost say that she was lion. You could hear her roar. There you go. And so she was woman, hear her roar. And so you had Sekhmet, who was supposed to protect them from disease and from plagues. And then there was a god of Thoth, who was a god of learning and language, and he was largely responsible for their development of hieroglyphics. He initiated this house of life and house of enlightenment that only the scribes in Egypt could attend, and they wanted to preserve their sacred knowledge, and so they had this god Thoth that they worshipped as well. And the last one is probably the most prominent one for our purposes today. His name was Imhotep. Imhotep. And so if you've ever seen the 1999 thriller, if you can call it that, The Mummy, with Brendan Fraser, that's actually the main antagonist in that movie. They go on this journey into a tomb, and they accidentally awake this guy Imhotep. And so Imhotep is actually one of the first people that you'll read about if you go way back into Egyptian language and Egyptian history. And what you'll find is that he didn't start as a king. He didn't start as someone who was super prominent or super powerful. He actually served as a chief advisor somewhere around 2600 BC. But this guy was an architect. He was very skilled. He was an artist, essentially, and he was very good at what he did. He created the plans for and oversaw the building of the Step Pyramid in Egypt, which was not just the first pyramid in Egypt, it was the first pyramid in the world. And so Imhotep was someone who accomplished a lot in his life, and the Pharaoh that he served under saw his accomplishments and saw the things that he was able to do for Egyptian culture. And so he raises him to a status of a demigod. And so he starts to get some praise and some worship in his life. He starts to get some really special attention. And then after he passes on, he's actually turned into a full-fledged deity. And he was worshipped across all of Egypt. It wasn't just a regional thing. They all worshipped Imhotep because he developed all of these great skills with architecture. So if you go to Egypt now and you see these things that remain, he was actually the guy who put those plans together. And he was also really important for them in developing modern medicine. He carried a lot with him, and he left a lot behind when he passed. But this is the place that Pharaoh finds himself. He's got all of these gods with all of their things. He's got Sekhmet, and they're supposed to wear this amulet, and she's going to protect them. He's got Thoth, who has all of this knowledge and this house of light and this house of enlightenment. And then he's got Imhotep, who has all of this contribution to Egyptian culture. He has all the power. He has access to all the knowledge in this land. And yet he finds his magicians suffering at the hands of this horrible plague, unable to stand because they're serving the wrong God. They're serving the wrong God. They've got access to the wrong stuff. They're focusing on the wrong things. And this is a beautiful metaphor for us today, because no matter what, if it's something or if it's someone, no matter what something or someone promises to us to bring us when we build our lives on anything but the Lord, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. Imhotep's name meant he who comes in peace. That's what they thought they were getting when they worshiped Imhotep. They thought that they were worshiping this guy who was going to bring them all of these tools and all of these tricks and all of these skilled trades that was going to make them last for an eternity, and it was going to bring them all of this satisfaction. And he brought them a lot of stuff, but he brought them absolutely no satisfaction. Pharaoh didn't need another god. He didn't need another magician. What he needed was a heart change. What Pharaoh needed at this point in the story was grace. Pharaoh needed to wake up and to see what God was doing. And what we see, unfortunately, was a problem in verse 12, because here's what happens to Pharaoh. It says in verse 12, you guys read with me. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Now, we tend to not like verses like this. We get a little bit uncomfortable when we see God talked about in this kind of way. And I don't have time to give this verse its due diligence today, but I promise you I will next week. And so let this be an incentive for you to return next week, because next week we're going to see it reverse again in the next plague, where Pharaoh hardens his own heart again. So next Sunday we're going to talk about why there's this tit for tat, why there's this give and take between God and Pharaoh, hardening Pharaoh's heart. But what we see in today's purposes is that Pharaoh needs grace, but God is hardening his heart. This is one of the most distinct things about our God. This is one of the most distinct things about him, is that he can use the resistance of people made in his image, and he uses the resistance of Pharaoh and Egyptians against them to bring about his plans and purposes. There's no other God in any religious system in the world that does that. All other gods are caught off guard when you don't go 100% according to their plan and to their way. They can't pivot. They can't work around. They can't work despite mankind. But God, we see him use the resistance of Pharaoh and the Egyptians against them to bring about his plans and purposes. And so here's what we're going to look at in just a few moments. If God is God, and this is what he shows about himself in this passage, if God is God, he is going to accomplish his purpose. If he is who we believe and confess he is, he's going to accomplish his purpose. But more than that, he's going to be glorified by our lives. He's going to be glorified by our lives as he accomplishes his purposes. Now, let's make that a little bit more personal. He will be glorified through obedience, and we will be a positive part of his purpose. Or the flip side is he will be glorified despite our disobedience, and we will join those who are destroyed. God is not limited by our lack of cooperation. God is not caught off guard when we do not cooperate according to his plan. And this verse reminds us that despite our free will, God is still the supreme influencer of this world because it is his. And we are made in his image. And again, we're going to go more into that next week. He is now using Pharaoh as a part of that creation reversal from Genesis 1 and 2 to remind us that we, like Pharaoh, exist in God's world, and we bear his image for his glory, for his purposes. And if you want to hear some really good news, he still has influences on his world today. He is still able to intervene and to interact and to take things that we see happen around us and spin them for his glory, no matter how unfortunate they seem. And we are here today because God has influenced us. I know I'm here today because God has influenced me. I know his word has spoken to me. I know his presence has drawn me. I know his greatness in creation that is revealed to me when I look around this world and this universe screams that there's an intelligent creator, that there's an intelligent designer who has a purpose for everything that's happening in this universe. And so God is influencing his universe. And so this is the truth that, to use our term earlier, knocks us off our high horse and knocks us off our pedestal. And this is the truth that humbles us before an almighty, all-powerful God who does not need us to accomplish what he seeks to see accomplished. He doesn't need us. Maybe nobody's ever told you that before, and I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but God does not need you. God does not need me. God is not limited by my lack of participation in what he wants to see happen. But here's the really beautiful thing about our God. He invites us to be a part of it. He invites us to be a part of what he's doing. He invites us to be a part of that third point there where he's going to be glorified through our obedience so we can serve a positive part of his purpose. But we become hardened and we develop a heart for the things of the world. God is the one who sends us an invitation, and it was sent by him, and that invitation was delivered at the cross. And the RSVP for us today is humility, because it elevates him and because it lowers self. And we see that God is greater than we are. Pharaoh at different times might mutter the words that he sinned. He might mutter the words that he's going to ask for prayer and that he believes God can help him. But what he really wanted was just relief. He really didn't want to worship God. He just wanted to stop itching. He just wanted to stop having these boils all over his body. He just wanted to stop having these inflictions come against him so he and his people could continue to try and conquer the known world and leave their mark on it. In their efforts to do so, they traded their soul. And there are multiple people in the Bible that made the same mistake. Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of beans. We see, what's the return on that investment? Pharaoh gave up his soul for control over slave labor so he could build bigger and greater things. Judas gave up his soul and Jesus in exchange for silver, in exchange for money. Demas left the ministry for love over the present world. What's the return on those investments? What do we really get back when we forfeit our soul and gain a part of the world? This is what the Egyptians are up against. I think of the words in Mark 8, verses 34 through 37. I'll flip there real quick this morning. It says, "Then he called to the crowd along with him and said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?'" What this reminds us of is no matter what we build, no matter what we learn, no matter what kind of knowledge we have, no matter what modern medicine can bring us and provide us, no matter what we leave behind us in the material world, gifts of God only serve their purpose when we remember they are gifts and not God. They are not God themselves. They are gifts from God that are supposed to help us glorify him. They're supposed to meet our daily needs, and they're supposed to equip us to go out into the world and to help others. But we fall into this trap of making them the center of our affection and the center of our attention. And so Imhotep left behind these blueprints to a bigger and better life, but he left them no path to peace. He left them in a position that they could build all kinds of structures. They would be studied forever, and they have been. Their civilization was impressive. They did some really neat things, but you know what they never were, thanks to him? Satisfied. They kept building taller, they kept building bigger, they kept developing and conquering more, but yet the nation of Egypt today is still struggling, and they're still without satisfaction because they are still serving the wrong God. They still have their worship out of place. And what the Egyptians never come to realize is that it doesn't matter what you know or what you're building, but if you're serving the wrong God, if you use the gifts from him that are supposed to be used for his glory, it's always going to leave us empty-handed. What a corrupt life that is, where we take the things from a gracious God and we make them the gods of our life. And yet we still think that he owes us something. We still believe when things go wrong or when things aren't firing on all cylinders for us in our life that God needs to intervene and spare us from something, and He has to answer every prayer exactly as we say it, like He owes us something, and that's simply not the case. But here's the magnificence of our God. He takes the broken pieces from our messes and mistakes, and He turns them into masterpieces for His glory. He takes all of the mistakes, He takes the messes, He takes the remnant from that kiln inside of our heart where that soot remains from all the mistakes that we've made, from all the things that we've wrongfully worshiped, and He weaves them into a masterpiece for His glory. He's not limited by us. Some would say that a God who can't stop everything from happening to His children and causing them pain is a God that's too small. I say a God that is bigger than that is a God who can actually take that suffering and that pain and turn it into something good, and turning into something that He can be glorified by. That's my God. That's our God. That's the God of the Bible. He doesn't have to do every single thing we say at the snap of our fingers. He's able to do much more than that because He's able to intervene on our behalf. He's able to spin really bad things and use them for our good, and He's able to be glorified by them. Show me praise God. Show me any other God, any other religion that can take something really bad and use it for that person's good. Show me any other God, any other religion that can take something that someone did that's horrible, that's disobedient, and be glorified by it. That's the power of our God. That's how great and magnificent that He is. Many of you know I played college baseball, and I love baseball, and I miss it. This is about the time of year I start to get the itch and want to get my cleats out and my glove out and go start to throw and long toss and all of that. Probably tear my labrum and my rotator cuff and everything else all at one time if I did that today. My senior year, I felt called to ministry, and I was really wrestling with where I needed to go and what I needed to do. And I had a couple of very small college offers to go play ball, and I also had 2 part-time youth ministry opportunities on the table. And I was also invited to go to FCA camp down in St. Simons. Some of you have heard this story before. And last minute, under some pressure from some coaches and from some other people, I actually flaked on FCA camp and decided to go to Perfect Game Tournament, which is a very large it's a very large developmental program up in Atlanta. They have a lot of big tournaments, and they draw kids from all around the nation and the world to come showcase their skills for baseball. And I got an invite to go to one of their tournaments. And so, as fate would have it, I go up there. It's the same day that the group loaded the bus and went down to St. Simons with FCA. And as I'm taking my first at bat, I was primarily a pitcher, but I played outfield some too. And I was playing center field that day. And I was in my first at bat, and I hit a ball deep in the hole between short and third. And I was pretty fast, and so I thought I could leg it out. And so I'm burning it up the first base line. Shortstop comes, backhands it, tries to throw on the run. When he throws on the run, the ball comes up the first base line. So I'm running to first. I see the first baseman kind of cut down in front of me on a knee. Go to one knee, he's going to try to scoop the ball. And so I think I can, pull a really nifty move here. And so in the middle of my stride, I jump off my left foot, and I try to jump over this first baseman and hit the base with my right foot. And about halfway through the air, it was like slow motion almost, he picks the ball, and he comes up to tag me. And as he raises up his shoulder, it clips the inside of my leg, and it sends me tumbling over first base. I fell right on my pitching wrist, and I broke it. And I lost my scholarship. Around that exact same time, the FCA bus arrived in St. Simons. So there's your serendipitous moment there. And so they're arriving in St. Simons, and I'm laying on the ground up in Atlanta with a broken arm. And I often wonder, what would have happened if I would have zigged instead of zagged that day? I wonder what would happen in my life if God had allowed me to land on first base and not be flipped over that first baseman, but instead I found myself rolling there in pain. And I know myself well enough to admit that if I had been spared from that broken arm, that if I had been spared from that pain, if I had been spared from that agony and I had to relearn how to write, I have all this scar tissue in my right wrist that makes my wrist kind of bow out now, even to today. Had to go through like 12 months of physical therapy to be able to use my hand again, and had to relearn eventually how to pitch. But I know myself well enough to know if that had not happened to me, I might be somewhere doing some good things, but I'd be doing them for the wrong reasons. I'd be serving myself somewhere. And instead, God did what He had to do to get my full, undivided attention. And it was painful. I was physically afflicted. And it took a long time for me to get back on my feet and to get back into where I wanted to be. But then I think about where God took me from that point, because it was that broken arm that brought me home. It was that broken arm that allowed me to later meet Jenna. It was that broken arm that led me to Emmanuel College, where I got a chance to walk on and be a part of their team, which led me to their ministry school, which in 4 years led me to Sandy Creek, which after that led me to here as your youth pastor, which led me to this place today. And I look back on that moment, and I'm so thankful that God didn't zig me when I zagged. I'm so thankful that He knocked me off my high horse. I'm so thankful that He got my attention, that I was serving this gift. I was serving this thing in my life that I had made a God. And He was able to take something that was very painful for me, still painful when it rains. It's still painful when a storm's coming in. You guys, some of you can relate to that. If you've had a broken bone before and it starts to hurt when the weather changes, and I see that scenario, and I say that my God is more powerful because He was not limited by something that I did out of disobedience. He worked through it. He worked despite it. He worked around it. And that's my God. That's my God. And someone can say, if God truly loved you, if God truly cared about you, would He not spare you from that pain? Would He not spare His children? Would He not spare His people from the pain and suffering that they see in this life? But I say the opposite, because if you've been a parent, if you're a grandparent, you know that a loving parent, a loving grandparent doesn't always say yes. It hurts. It hurts sometimes to look your children in the eyes and say no. It hurts to look them in the eyes and say, you did wrong. And I need to correct you. I need to rebuke you. And there's tears and there's snot and there's boogers and there's weeping and wailing and all these different things. But I do it because I love them. I do it because I care about them. And in that very same way, God allows us to have our attention be brought back to Him by things that we face in this life. But yet still, He's weaving it and working it for our good and for His glory. That's my God. That's your God. One of the painful things about ministry is that you raise up individuals under you. You see them trained and grow in the Lord, and you see them suffer through hardship, difficult times. I immediately think of Aaron and Jesse and what they've gone through with Charlie, and God has been so good to them throughout that circumstance. Another gentleman in my life that I've seen come through here had a really difficult diagnosis with someone in his family this week, and I want to share with you guys a couple of quotes, and then we'll be done this morning. And so I was talking with this individual this week, and here's what he said about dealing with this difficult diagnosis. He said this. He said, I'm trying to embrace that God is keeping me on the most sanctifying road as possible, and that He's there with me, and that whatever is going to come from this road is going to be for my good. He said, we don't always see it that way. He said, but I believe that He has me and my family on the most sanctifying road as possible. God's going to keep us there. God has a way of putting us on the most sanctifying road in the most sanctifying place. And we might get mad about it, and we might fight against it, but if we would just embrace His power in that place and on that road, we would see the beauty and the magnitude of His sovereignty and what He's able to do. John Piper would say this. He says, not only is our affliction momentary, not only is it light, compared to eternity and glory there, it is totally meaningful. Every millisecond of your pain from the fallen nature of fallen man to every millisecond of your pain on your path of obedience is producing a peculiar glory. And you say that's meaningless. It's not. Don't say that. It is working for you an eternal way of glory. My friends, whatever you're facing today, whatever you've done, whatever you've brought with you in here today as a burden, whatever you've said that you can't take back, whatever you're going through that no one knows about, whatever that thing is for you that's constricting you, it's causing you to lose sleep at night, know that it's not meaningless. Know that it's not for nothing. Know that God is working through that thing. We don't always see it that way. We don't always want to embrace it that way, but it's not meaningless. God is able to take the broken pieces of our life and spin them and weave them into a masterpiece for His glory. And here's the beautiful thing. He can take that very thing that torments us and tempts us and weave it into a picture for His glory. So that when others see your life, when others see my life, they see God, and they see His goodness, and they see His grace. And maybe this morning you just need a little bit of grace. Maybe this morning you've been serving under self. You know what? There's not a lot of grace from self. We're not very kind to ourselves. We're pretty hard on ourselves most of the time, honestly. We set these goals that we can't keep. We try to achieve them by our own effort. That's not the way to go about it. That's an exhausting lifestyle. Maybe you have a spouse. Maybe you have a loved one that's not very gracious. Maybe this morning you just need to remember that you're in the most gracious relationship in the universe if you're in a gracious relationship with your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Because God, in His justness, sent His Son to take our place upon Calvary's cross so He could bear the weight of our sin. He could bear God's wrath, and He spared us from that wrath, which is His mercy. So we see God's justness displayed upon the cross, but we also see His mercy because we're spared from what we rightfully deserve. And then just like the Hebrew people and just like the young man the story holds, we're able to live a life of richness and of glory because of the grace that comes from our Heavenly Father. We don't deserve it. There's nothing we can do to earn it. There's nothing that we can build in this life with knowledge and with repetition and with doing things and having all these good works that can help us reach it. It is grace, and it's amazing. It truly is amazing. We sing that all the time. We also sing that His grace is enough. God's demands are tough. There's a couple of passages in the New Testament, I think of Romans 12, I think of James chapter 4, and there's like 30 demands from God, from the biblical authors, of how to live a lifestyle. Think about Romans 12. There's 30 things in Romans chapter 12. In the very chapter that Paul is transitioning from explaining the gospel, he's explaining the power of God in salvation. He's explaining what all this means the first 11 chapters. Then chapter 12, he begins to flip. And he begins to tell what that looks like for us. How do we live because of that truth? And he gives 30 things in a couple of verses. It's daunting. It's overwhelming. But you know what? We don't do it on our own. We do it by the grace of God. It's His grace that equips us to accomplish His word. It's the power and presence of His Holy Spirit that walks with us and guides us down that sanctifying road every single day of our life. And it's that very same grace that enables us to help others when we come across those who are hurting as well. So as Bob comes this morning, I just want to challenge you guys. Maybe this morning you're being really hard on yourself. Maybe this morning you've got somebody being really hard on you. Maybe this morning you're just in a place where you need some grace. Maybe you've tried to do it all on your own. Let me remind you, you were not made to bear that kind of pressure. You will buckle under it every single time. We were not designed to do things our own way and to have satisfaction and to have success. And God, in His justness, and God in His mercy, and God in His grace, He saw fit to send His Son, Jesus Christ, to take our place. And He accepts us with open arms. So whatever that thing is that you've got in your life today, whatever that suffering, whatever that infliction is today, know that it's not so big that God's grace cannot cover it. Whatever that thing is you're thinking about right now, that you're wondering why it's going on, how God's going to use it, what did you do to deserve this? How long is it going to last? Why is this person treating you this way? God is capable of taking that very thing that you're thinking about right now and using it for your good. He can take the soot after the ashes of our life and after the catastrophe that happens in our life, and He can use it for His glory and for His purposes. Do you trust Him to do that? Do you believe that He can do that? Do you believe that He is a God that is capable of intervening in your life in such a way that He can be glorified by all the messes that we make? I'm here to tell you that's my God. That's my God. And He sent an invitation for you to be a part of what He's doing and be a part of His purposes. And He sent it to the cross. When we look to the cross, we see our God beckoning to us with open arms, saying His grace is enough.